All right, praising God for the way in which he does not simply instruct us that we need to develop consistency in character, meaning, as we say from time to time, a consistency between our personality and our character, what we actually are, but the way in which he guides us into that consistency. Understanding that, I think if we're all honest, we all struggle to some degree to be the person we aspire to be, or at least aspire to have people think that we are. In this chapter, where in the first, 11 verses or so, we're going to seem to see the distinction between the Christ and his triumphal entry, him setting the example once again that he actually is what he appears to be. The rest of the chapter, consistent with some things that we saw in the similar story detailed in Matthew's gospel, him helping to understand, him helping us to understand the ways in which Israel not only is not everything it appears to be, it is not what it should be. Understanding that Christ is not only what he appears to be, he is what he should be. The first 11 verses of chapter 11, a chapter I want to call, as we already kind of alluded to, appearances, the triumphal entry. Those first 11 verses are going to talk about that triumphal entry, as verses 12 through 14, as we mentioned before, are going to seem to go in a disparate direction, telling a bunch of assorted stories that I think have a common theme. Understanding that the entire rest of the chapter, I think, is going to go into that whole concept of the difference between what Israel is and what it appears to be. That section is going to start with a story about a fig tree that Jesus curses in verses 12 through 14, as he is going to cleanse the temple in verses 15 through 19, appearing to once again pass by the fig tree. His disciples, seeing it wither, are going to marvel at the fact that it is actually withered in verses 20 through 26, at which point he is going to give them a lesson on not only faith, but forgiveness, as the end of the chapter is going to show us in verses 27 through 33. The Pharisees, or the scribes, and who is it this time? Leave the Pharisees alone. The priests, the scribes, and the elders challenging his authority to do some of the things that he has done during after the triumphal entry. I'm guessing not the least of that being clearing the temple. But the reason why I saw that distinction between the appearance that Christ projected and the appearance that Israel is projecting at this time is, as we have mentioned, in the triumphal entry, he is not offering a false hope. The reason they are calling out Hosanna in the highest has everything to do with what he was really doing in Israel leading up to the triumphal entry. So he is as advertised, the Son of God. However, as he comes to a fig tree in leaf, we had a good question in a recent Wednesday night about why is he cursing the fig tree if it's not in season for figs? Well, as one of our brothers helped me understand, this brother understands fig trees. And as I have been counseled before, a fig tree is not a sin for it to be out of season, but it is a sin for it to be in leaf, projecting the appearance of having fruit when it has none. Understanding that it is the type of tree that when it produces leaves, the leaves are typically associated with it having fruit. And that, even if that is not the case, it is a super consistent point to the rest of a point that is going to come out in the rest of the chapter, as he is going to go from the fig tree that seems to offer the appearance that it has fruit when it really has none, to go into the temple that appears that it is a place for refuge. He's literally going to call it a house of prayer. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times I'm praying, sometimes just out of gratitude. But if I'm honest, a lot of times I'm praying because I got needs. And one of the things it brings to mind is, to this day, you can still see pictures of the Wailing Wall, one of the only parts of the old temple structure that still stands, and people praying passionately at the walls. I think they even get into the habit of placing prayers written down into the cracks in the stones that still at least exist on that part of the wall, even if the temple is completely gone. And so that should have been a place in Jesus's day where people were able to pray passionately, but so much of what was allotted for people coming close to God had been now crowded out by people who were doing business in God's space. Therefore, the temple was not completely what it should have been, meaning it appeared to be a place of refuge for those in need of God's comfort, but it had actually become a place where it was really more comfortable for people to kind of do their own thing. at least those who had clout, as Christ will go on to make a similar point to his own disciples, or I think the 12 apostles at this point, as they pass back by the withered fig tree, realizing the words that Jesus had spoken to it, surprised that so quickly it had withered. He is going to seem to prove the point to them that even though they might be praying, there might be a difference between their prayers to God and their actual expectations, telling them that if they pray and genuinely believe that they will be able to not only do things similar to what he did to the fig tree, they'll be able to move mountains, something that's tremendously convicting, especially when he goes on to say beneath the surface of their prayers, it's not only the existence or the absence of belief that affects whether or not the prayers will actually matter. I don't know, it sounds harsh, but whether they'll actually get what they're praying for, but whether or not they are genuinely forgiving. Something that caught my attention in Mark's description of this story: everyone who they have something against. Seems like a tall order, but once again, one of the things we might want to understand the need to pray for is the ability to genuinely forgive everyone, understanding that this description from Mark makes it sound like it's not only our belief that potentially hinders our prayers, but our absence of forgiveness. Mercy, Lord. As the final section of the chapter describes the scribes, chief priests, and elders challenging his authority to do some of the things that he has done after the triumphal entry, raising this irony. Even though they are challenging his authority as what appears to be a mere servant of God, they actually seem less interested in serving God as they seem in actually trying to be God. And of course, being God in the fullness of his form would seem absurd, but it seems as though their challenges are more rooted in their desire to replace God as the actual functional authority figures in Israel. Helping to underscore once again the way in which Christ's triumphal entry helped to prove that he was not only what he appeared to be, but he was what he needed to be, in contrast to the fig tree that, being in leaf, wasn't producing fruit. It wasn't what it quite possibly appeared to be, and that is productive, giving us an introduction to the way in which he is cleansing the temple, which was not what it should have been and not what it appeared to be to those who are trying to approach God for help with legitimate needs. Likewise, as he is counseling his apostles using the example of the withered fig tree, he seems to be helping them understand that when they approach God, possibly through prayer, it is so important that beyond merely outwardly praying, that they genuinely believe that God is willing and able to do the things that they are asking him to do, and maybe just as importantly, that they are forgiving in the way that he has told them to do. Once again, mercy, Lord, to strengthen us to be able to forgive in that way. As finally, he is going to address the scribes, the chief priests, elders, etc., in the way in which they are challenging his authority, but doing so from a perspective that honestly seems to show that beyond acting as servants of God, they are really quite possibly trying to preserve the ways in which they have replaced God as the functional authority in Israel. Lessons that I'm convinced go beyond Israel to still counsel us in the ways that we need to close the distance between personality and character even today.